All right, welcome to Pathway to Purpose. I am super excited. Like we've got this amazing trio band together, and I probably could go on forever about an intro. So I'm gonna be very eloquent. First of all, I have the amazing man. If you have not ever heard of Chuck Keels, man, cancer survivor, amazing story. Like he's on the 700 club, like touched by Jesus, like definitely created a foundation with him and his late wife Hannah, who's been on this podcast, episode 8. I encourage you, if you haven't heard that, go and listen to that, hear their amazing story together, and then follow him. He does a repeat visit after her passing, which is a journey in and of itself on episode 33. I could just speak forever on what he has learned and what he teaches and coaches. He's created the Get Up and Live Foundation for helping those people that are cancer. And you could see that they got their garb on. I have the I'll have to say, who's this? Jax.
Jax.
I got
Yeah.
Jax here, sits by me all the time. I appreciate Chuck for that. And I'm going to segue over to Chris. Chris is just this cancer survivor. I don't want it to be a cancer theme. I just want us to be a live thing, but he has just this amazing energy. He was on my last episode. Man, I got some wonderful, amazing feedback from people that were struggling, that his message really touched their heart. And when Chuck heard the whole podcast, he's like, "Man, we should get together because we all met like through each other." Chuck's been on the
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
He came here in Connecticut to speak because Chris invited him. Chris was following him. We connected in this like only God way, right? And so now we're here and basically living a life of joy from three broken guys. We're here to chat today. So welcome, guys.
Yeah,
Thank
man. You know,
you.
I didn't follow Chuck. I was stalking Chuck. I was stalking Chuck.
And you cannot use the word just when you introduce this guy, Chris, because he has got to be one of the busiest guys. And the fact that I did get to spend a few days with him there in Connecticut, and it was just so cool because our energy, that resonates from God working through us. It was a really, really cool experience.
We're just getting a crisp cut down at the fellas down at the First Christian Barbershop. I lived in this town my whole life. Chuck comes into town. I never met the guy. And he's like, I'm gonna stop and get a haircut first. And he's like, dude, you gotta come down here. How close are you to this? Right on Main Street. He gives me the address. I'm like, man, I could run there in like 2 minutes. He's like, you gotta get down here. And I walk in and there's like these ring lights hung everywhere, like halos, and there's a big sign in the middle. And barbershops are pretty known for cussing, right? Like there's foul language and in some really derogatory themes there. And in a big giant sign says this is a Christian establishment. There'll be no swearing, right? Christian music playing, like you're getting a haircut that's heavenly, man. Like a
It,
Chris cut, and then they pray for you, man. It's just amazing.
A
it was
heavenly
They all
haircut.
remember you. They all
it's
remember you, Chuck. They're like, tell Chuck we said hello, man.
I was telling my guy cutting my hair, my story, and he was like, "This is amazing. This you know the whole miraculous healing from stage 4 cancer and what happened there." And I go, "Oh, you got worship music on your TV right now. You're on YouTube. Just type in Chuck Keels." And they type in Chuck Keels, and they start looking at it and looking at me. Then they start taking pictures of me like I was like, what are you doing? But it was just one of those things where like you said, there was 20 barbershops that popped up, and I walked into that one, and I was sitting there ready to get my haircut, and the guys coming in to get their haircut would go around and hug every
Each other.
single guy cutting
Yeah.
the hair. And I'm watching this, and then I was like looking at the sign, no cussing. This is a Christian establishment. And then I looked over at the TV, and it had worship music, some in English, some in Spanish, and I was like, okay, God, where did you just bring me into? And like you said, it was not a haircut, man. It was a holy haircut.
It was I usually say when somebody gets to come, like, man, that's a crisp cut. Now I'm like, man, that's a Christ cut right there, bro. That is a Christ cut.
And then a couple of the guys showed up at my speaking event with their wives.
Well, they did. Yeah. They still talk
Right.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Your speaking event was great. Chuck, you brought something that I just want to touch on because I don't know, God kind of inspired it, is you were sharing your story, right? And I love the fact that you share your story. And I've realized too that like when I share my story, it gets us closer to each other. And Chris, is really phenomenal at the story. But I've been working with some guys actually I met through some of you that like, hey, what if you don't have this powerful story or like whatever, right? And so I started to say, so tell me a little bit about you. And this person was like, came from this other country, didn't have running water, like all this stuff. I said, like, oh my God, like what, you don't think that story is like important or powerful or whatever? Like, I think we've got this inner judge, right? That's like, hey, I'm not worthy. And I think this kind of plays it out. But I think all of us have a story that allows us to kind of connect and be there and help each other out or just hold space. But I think a lot of people are like, hey, I don't have this story. Like this magical, like, hey, I'm walking on water, or God touched me and the burning bush was out in the backyard. Like, you know what I mean? Let's share a little bit about that because I think your story, you share it very awesomely. I know Chris talks about his story, but like for the people that may be listening, like you never know what somebody's silently struggling with. You know what I mean? And it could be God, um, speaking through you to share that at that moment to help somebody. What do you
Mm.
guys think of that?
Uh, so, like you said, most people are not doing podcasts. Most people are not standing on stage somewhere speaking. Most people may not be a realtor with a leader in a real estate group that that steers people and unites people and pulls them together. And what most people that don't do these things don't realize is they do have a story. They do have a story, and it might not be like we're talking about, but it might be. I mean, I met a girl in the airport that works for Southwest Airlines who said, I had a stroke last year and I'm just got back to work. And it's a miracle that I'm back to work. And we started talking about, my story, her story. And I said, I would tell that story every day. I would tell that story all day long because God, she said it was an absolute miracle that she's there right now. And her doctor even said that they had stroke patients that are in nursing homes and can't take care of themselves and their family. And so people have stories, and you may not be in a situation to tell it, 5 times a day, 10 times, 15 times a day, like I do. This is just this was my purpose. God gave me this amazing, miraculous healing from stage 4 cancer. And he said, tell everybody you can. And I don't take my job lightly. I take it very seriously. And so when I'm working with other people telling their story, and you guys know this is old sales stuff. This is stuff I learned back when I was a real estate guy, is package your story as powerful as possible, because you may only get that 15-second elevator pitch standing in line at the grocery store and say, you want to, I'm talking about weather, I'm talking about football, I'm talking about everything going on, and I'm saying, you want to hear something crazy? I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and put in hospice in 2015. I just say that and people are like, everything around me stops. And I say it loud enough that the cashier, 3 more people in line, everybody in a barber shop, everybody around me hears my story, and I tell it loud. And the crazy thing is when that happens is when all of a sudden now you're leaving that person you were talking to, and the guy behind you pokes you on the back and says, hey, you got a second? I overheard your story. God had me telling that guy my story so that guy could hear my story. You don't know who in the room is put in your path. And I love that. I heard a pastor say this last week. We see homeless people, we see all these people around us, and we don't know which ones are angels. We don't know. So when you walk right past somebody, and I could have told them my story, or I could have gave them a hug, or I could have prayed with them, we walk right past them, and the pastor said, you don't know which one of these people God put in your path is an angel. And so, it makes you think when you are like, I'm in a hurry and I got to get here and I don't want to spend, 15, 20 minutes with this person. It makes you really think and slow down and stop. And I think that from all of us coming from the cancer world, I know for a fact that is a game changer, and that is a showstopper. And when you have that cancer diagnosis, all of a sudden everything changes in your mind, because it's like, what if this is a short journey? Have I lived the life I want to live? Have I accomplished the things I want to accomplish? And so, basically what I want to do is I don't want to miss any single moment in my life right now.
But there's I really want you to hear this, and I know you've heard it many, many times, is that I was blessed to spend 40 hours with you, and I felt like it was the best 40 hours of my life, right? I got to walk around with a guy. Your purpose is not just telling your story. Your purpose is actually living it. And the way you show up, and I was thinking about this the other day when we were talking, Todd, is the pathway to purpose. When you realize there's one purpose that we all have, it's a common purpose that was planted in us, is to love other people. When we realize what that word means, what does it mean to love somebody? It's seeing people, it's acknowledging who they are and seeing them for who God made them to be, not for what their outward appearance is, not for what they're, but for the light that lives inside them that maybe they've buried for years and years and years and decades of their lives because of environments they've been in and what they were taught to learn about themselves. But walking around with you, like, you just displayed love, your energy. And even in the midst of suffering, we could be in a barbershop and everybody's laughing and praying, and then we're in a coffee shop and all of a sudden we're listening to a song that reminded you of the love of your life, and all of a sudden it's like you're in tears. And it doesn't mean that we don't face the storms and the struggles. It just means that I'm going to live with joy in my heart. And you walk around loving on people. And our story, everybody's got one, and sometimes we minimize the story that God. All you have to do is just do this: breathe in and breathe out to realize your story. Is that the shot that you have to even breathe in and out for a moment is a miracle. You talk about a miraculous healing. We all have miraculous births. Like, we
Mhm.
shouldn't be here. Like, this is a miracle, this unity right now that God's placed together. He said, listen, I'm creating a nucleus. I know what I'm doing. Do you know what I'm doing through you? When you realize that,
Mm.
that story of going out and living it, getting up and live, that gall, get up and live, and getting up and living for what Christ called us to do, was to love other people. He just did that so we could go out and actually see people, acknowledge who, the one bagging your groceries, the one that you think is just a teenager, the one, like, your display of love to everybody around you, Chuck and Todd.
Mm.
Like, people do see it. That's the story.
Yeah.
Like, we're all miraculous in some way. Like, it's just beautiful. God's touched us all, and we
Yeah.
haven't realized it yet.
I always say, so that time that I saw you guys, I did 26 speaking events in my RV around the country at that time, but it wasn't the 26 speaking events. It was what God had planned between the events, who I was going to meet, and it was unbelievable, unbelievable. And who is the greatest teacher of all times that taught us about love?
Yeah.
Was Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ, man. Like,
Was
come
Jesus
on.
Christ.
Like,
I mean, they
even if
said,
you're like, I'm not a religious guy, but like, you just look at his walk. Like, it's not like it's a good walk.
You
It's a
know,
good walk.
You know, it's funny, like, because when, you know, you got the people, and I'm speaking to the people that are like, oh, okay, somebody's talking about Jesus, and they start to get like, hey, I'm going to smack you in the head with the, you know, somebody's just going to Bible thump me and just kind of slap me in the head with the Bible. But one of the things, being somebody that like, and Chuck and I were talking about this before, is when you get slapped with like a diagnosis or something that's like, man, this can end your life in a moment, right? You're like, you know, I had an old boss that used to say this. He used to say this to me. We were in sales. He goes, Todd, you know what? There's no atheists in foxholes, man. When the bombs are flying, you're praying to something, right? And oh, that stuck in my mind when I was going through it. But I sat with God, like, how, you know, teaching me. But I studied, like, I'm the guy that looks at like, what's my worst case scenario, and that's death, right? Like, and then if I could accept that and work backwards, then I'm okay. But the joy and the benefit in doing that was like I searched what this would mean, and I searched the Bible, I searched like things on Netflix, like all this stuff. But what I was getting back to what Chris was saying was, if you just follow and listen to the stories of what Jesus did and what he was trying to teach us. He wasn't about like, hey, this religion thing. He was like, follow me, do what I'm, you know, do what I'm doing. Like that will lead you to the Father, right? Like let's break it down into a realistic thing. And he also said to his followers, right? I'm going to ask you to do hard things. Like life is not, and in my experience, and I know I talked to both you guys about this, is the struggle and the suffering or whatever we call it in our mind is that part that gives us the purpose, the gift, and if you look at it in that way rather than sitting in the fear of escaping it. I know that was a little heavy, guys. I'm sorry, I just went there.
Oh, absolutely. And why? And but the question is, why is he giving us the struggles and the hard stuff? Why is he giving us the struggles and the hard stuff? And you think about this, and what do most people do? They try to avoid the struggles and the hard stuff. And I welcome the struggles and the hard stuff because that's where we grow. He has you going through something very difficult right now because there's something much bigger coming up and you would not be prepared for it. And if you lived on easy street your entire life, your capacity is different. If you went through hard times, my favorite pastors around the country are the ones that I know their backstory, the ones that had, you know, drug problems and all kinds of stuff. And you meet them and you're listening to their story and you're like, I knew there was some reason why I was connected to you, because you went through some hard things. Not that there aren't good pastors out there that haven't been through such hard things, but my favorite ones are the ones that have been through the hardships and the struggle. You know, and maybe this conversation between the three of us, maybe it is about how powerful our story is, you know, how powerful our story is. And the story may be a guy that has a miraculous healing from stage 4 cancer, and God says, go tell everybody how much I love them. But it may be somebody that said, you know, mine was just my son was just the prodigal son. He just was off the rails, and he was just, you know, the partying and the carrying on. And I was like, this dude ain't gonna live until he's 25, and now he's going to church with me, or now he's going to church and he's getting married, and you hear these stories. So every single story is important, and that's what people need to be sharing out there, to tell people. I always tell people I was an athlete, you know. I was a football player, I was a wrestler, I was a basketball player. I loved competition. So this is kind of a funny thing that you wouldn't think that competition guy back when I was 16, 17, 18 in high school and college, you wouldn't think that would be part of me now. And what's happening is God put somebody in my path, and he's like, go get them. And I tell them my story, and they're standing there. And as soon as I say I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I had 2 hospice nurses sitting on my living room couch in tears. and they're like, stage 4 cancer, you're standing here right now, how can that be? And I tell them the story, and then I tell them that I was laying in the recovery room after emergency surgery when my spine collapsed, and somebody was standing there, and I thought it was a doctor, and he reached out and touched my shoulder, and I look up, and in my head it says, "You're in the presence of Jesus." And I look up again and he's gone. So 2 to 3 seconds of my life, according to what I heard in my head, I was in the presence of Jesus. And that day, from a broken back and surgery, the pain all stopped. I'm telling the story to the believers and non-believers, and the look on their face, and I'm showing them pictures on my phone, broken bones and me down 40 pounds and dying of cancer. And I'm like, or they'll be like, I got to go to work, or I'm like, I got to go do something. And I'll say, let's stay in touch, let's stay in touch. And I'll give them a hug. I hug everybody. I give them a hug and I walk away. And you guys ever see like The Rock when he does those scenes where everything behind him's blowing up and he's just walking away? You know what I mean? I'm walking away and I'm thinking they never saw this coming. They never saw the God story coming. And I love it. It's that athlete in me. It's that competition in me. I love it. I feel like I'm walking away and it's just blowing up behind me. You can see, shrapnel flying. And what I see when I look back is that person standing there and the look on their face like, wow, I didn't see this coming, So I love the power of telling the story.
Yeah. Even sharing your story, right? So say you're like, and you see this in, real estate and things in sales. I used to do medical device sales. It's like, well, hey, maybe you don't have a story around this, but you could use my story, right? So you come across somebody like, hey, Chris had this story about, the throat cancer, all that stuff, right? Or not just necessarily that, like people are struggling in personal, intimate relationships, like, hey, I've been through a tough divorce or a bad relationship. The thing that the brain tumor taught me, and here's the kind of backstory. I'm not sure if I shared it with you guys, but like the world stopped for a moment for me. It was like, boom, like, hey, you got a tumor. You're not crazy. You got a marble-sized tumor in your head. I'm like, what? Like, and the story about when they said, and I've created a shirt line around it, when they said, I'm so sorry. I felt like I was dead already. They were like, you're dead. Like I'm sitting there like, okay. And I totally started to put that into practice where I don't, we were talking about this before that, where I don't like share I'm sorry. Like it's a knee-jerk reaction to something hard that we don't know how to talk about. And truly we may be sorry. I don't want to take that away from people. Yeah. But I now look at people and I say, that's hard.
Yeah.
And you give them the space to just be with it and be there with them, right? And, I work with patients. I do healthcare. I'm doing hospice now. I do that part-time. And I say, but we do hard things. And we're going to do some hard things together. We're going to walk that journey together. And sometimes what we need and what people need is just somebody to walk alongside them. Not necessarily give them advice, not necessarily like whatever, just to be like, man, I'm gonna be here with you. And we talk about leadership. Like a leader is somebody that's just gonna walk into that battle with them and maybe be that source of strength. And that's what Jesus was, right? Like, I'm gonna be that source of strength just to stand there and walk with you. Like I did that with a patient's family the other day. I said, let's take care of him right now. I walked into it. I could felt the energy was low. Like there was all this stuff going on. I said, let me take care of that. And they did it with me. We did it alongside, and it gave them the support. And that's what people need.
Yeah.
I think.
There's I think when we look at the struggles in our lives, and we have to ask ourselves, what are we dependent on? And God really wants us to be dependent on only one thing, him, right? And so we try to be dependent on, and you think about just stories and parables in the Bible, the guy that was waiting for other people to put him in the water so he could be healed. It wasn't until he realized that he didn't have to be dependent on his mat or other people. He just had to acknowledge that Christ could heal him. And he says, get up and walk. Or the people that are hungry, God feeds them. The people that are hurting, God heals them. The people that are lost, he seeks them and finds them. It's like all these things you just realize we're all just dependent people. But what are we depending on? And when we realize that the one thing that we can be dependent on doesn't mean that we're not going to be in the midst of storms. You could just look at my favorite story is Jesus being in this in the boat sleeping, man, and the storms all around him, and they're panicking. They're like, we gotta wake him up. He doesn't know. And they wake him up, and he's just like, oh, ye of little faith, man. I'm the source of your peace. Stop looking at the stuff around you. Many, many times in the parables of the Bible, that's what Jesus said in the New Testament. It's like, listen, I'm your source of peace. Stop looking at all the other stuff. It doesn't mean that stuff's not happening. But if you fix your eyes on that, that's what you're going to go towards. If you stay fixed on me, we're going to get through it together. It's the story where he picks you up and carries you when you can't do it yourself. Like this, we got to be super aware that God has his purpose for each of us. And that purpose is for us to find ours, or to not just find it. We already have our purpose, by the way. Everyone's got it. And that purpose comes back to the alignment with what God says about you, not the opinions of other people, what the world will tell you who you are, what your parents will tell you are. They're just coming up in the environments that they're in. When you align with who God says you are, you will start to realize that if you just go out and start loving in the world, you're going to be put into places where God wants you to be. But if you do it on your own, and go into it because he gave us the free will, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do, and you never consult or align with God's way of thinking or his perspective, you're going to live. That's true suffering. That's true suffering, not aligning with God's message. If I'm going to suffer, man, I'm going to be with the big guy because I know no one else is going to help me like he is. It's just, what are you dependent on?
One thing that I love about watching you, Chris, when I was still working landscape designing and stuff, paying the bills before the foundation took off. And I remember it was Saturday. And what do you do on Saturday? You don't have to go to work. You don't do much. You know, it's like I want to just have my coffee and chill. And I was sitting in my condo, and God, I hear a voice in my head. He says, nothing's going to happen if you stay in here today. And I said, uh-oh, you know, and I, you know, get a shower and get dressed, and I head down to the farmer's market. And some of the conversations and people I met at the farmer's market blew my mind. I was trying to write a book at the time, and I meet a girl that's selling flowers or something and she says, "Oh, I'm a published author. I'll help you." And I was like, "What just happened?"
There it is.
And then I
There
thought, this would have never happened if I would have stayed there. And I know, like I said, I love watching you because you are always in the community, always in the mix, always, you know, out there. And something you said earlier was, we can talk and people can listen to these words and they might sink in, but they might not. But the ones that I love hearing from 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, are the ones that said, man, I don't know if I'm a believer or not. I haven't been to church since with my grandma when I was a little kid. But I couldn't stop watching your journey and your story. And so what happens there is there's the ones that we don't have to do the lip service. They're watching. They're watching. There's a, and I'm terrible at memorizing Bible phrases, and I wish I was better, but I'm also terrible at memorizing songs. My favorite songs, I sing the first verse and I hum the next two because I can't remember them, you know.
Unless they're 80s metal band, I can't remember them either.
Even my old even my old country music and stuff, I was like, man, but the thing was, I can't memorize Bible verses, but I remember them and I live them. And there was a verse that I was trying to memorize, and I'll look it up to right when we get off of here. And it says, are you a reflection? Are people looking at you and seeing Jesus? Are they? And when I live my life, I want people around me to go, and I've had people come over to me like at the gym, at a restaurant. There's something up with you, dude. I don't know what it is. I'm over there watching. I want people to look at me and see Jesus.
And doing
You
it.
can't shine your light too much, and to that, like when you're excited about something, you just want to tell everybody.
Yeah.
And you come to know Christ, especially when people first accept Christ, then it's like you're jamming it everywhere you can, and that's not, you gotta walk alongside of where somebody's at. That's all Jesus did. He met the woman at the well. He's just like, hey, I'm here to get a drink. Could you give me a drink? And he starts talking to her, but he knows her. And then through her acknowledgement, she comes to realize it. He doesn't force it on her. He just says, listen, whoever drinks from my well, they'll never thirst again, man. I know where you've been. I know you're struggling. Just understand that one day you're not going to have to go find a church to go talk to me. I am the Messiah. I'm here for you.
So I love what you shared, Chuck, and I'm gonna kindly roast Chris in a way that's awesome. Is the one thing that I love about Chris is he's out there doing it. Like when he says something to me, like I feel like God saying, like, do this. Like he invited me to this men's breakfast. Yeah, I'm there. And he's out there, right? And this is a message for those who may be listening is you discover your little purposes. We know that there's this one big purpose. We know that, but you discover these purposes by being out there, by not by falling on your knees or seeing somebody falling on their knees and picking them up or sharing a story or doing that. But I wanted to segue to what you guys said, and this is a topic that I think everybody can relate to, because I love the stories of Jesus, and he talked about it with some of the people that he helped and healed, right? It's about the word faith. And I think a lot of people, myself included, had struggled with that, like doubting Thomas, right? Or like, do we need to see, like, if you saw The Messiah on Netflix, do we need to see somebody walking? I live on a lake, so I'm pointing out to the water. Do we need to see somebody walking on water to believe or to have this faith? But what I've learned to do, and Chuck was just sharing some clear examples, is like that guy, that person with the book, right? Like that's a miracle, right? Is that like that's part of this plan, but we don't like attribute it to faith. Like, and he always talked about like, hey, I'm gonna heal her because of her faith, right? So share with me, I want to hear from both of you guys on this, is what's your view on faith? What if you're not feeling the faith? I'd love to hear your guys' take on faith, because I think it's a topic that it's like that underlying thing when you were sharing with that about that guy, Chuck, that said, yeah, I'm not sure, I haven't been to church in a while. Like I believe all that comes together with faith.
So two things popped in my head right away. In my Bible study, I also watch other pastors' little clips. I watch stuff from The Chosen, and just yesterday was a scene with Jesus and Nicodemus. And Nicodemus, the actor that plays that boy, he gives me chills, because he's like, he knows he's in the presence of Jesus. He knows he's in the presence of God. And Jesus said, do you hear that right now? What is that? And he says, it's the wind. How do you know it's the wind? And he says, I know it. Where's it coming from? Where's it going? We don't know. That's faith. That's faith. And I also heard a story that I'll try to shorten it, but there was a guy who his family, they went to church, but he just like, I still don't understand this whole Jesus thing. I don't know if I really believe. And he's been, taking his family to church for years, and it's Christmas, and he just looks at his wife and he goes, I don't think I'm going to go. She says, it's Christmas. Everybody goes on Christmas. He says, I don't feel it. I'm not going. So the family leaves and he's doing things in the house, and he looks outside and it starts to snow. And he hears something outside, so he opens the front door, and there's like a whole flock of birds that landed in the yard. And it's starting to snow harder, and their wings are starting to freeze. And they're not flying into the trees or into a nest or it's somewhere where it's warm. So he opened both of his garage doors and he put some food and he put some water in there, and he turned on the heater, and he's trying to shoo the birds into the garage to save them from the cold. And they won't go. They're afraid of him. They're every time he comes out, their wings are all flapping, they're freezing, but they can't fly away, but they're running away from him and not going into the garage. And he's thinking, how can I get them in the garage? They're so afraid of me. They just don't know I'm trying to help them. And he just keeps doing this. And then all of a sudden, he just thought, man, if I was another bird, they would probably just listen to me or follow me or go into the garage, and I could save them if I was one of them. And right at that moment, the church bells start ringing, and he's standing there, and he's like, if I was one of them, they would understand this. And that's when he realized that Jesus was sent to us to save us.
Wow. It's so powerful. You think about,
Did we lose Chris?
Is he frozen?
Chris is frozen. He'll jump back in a minute. That was powerful. You think about
faith in
that.
the set. Faith
There he is.
faith is the
You're freezing on us, Chris.
unstable internet. I'm sitting on top of the router, sitting on top of it, basically. Like nothing else on in the house, just the router.
It's all good, Chris. You pop back when you're doing the do. Are you there? Yes.
This is how the devil jacks with us, because we've been talking now for 20 minutes without a single flaw. And I knew he was getting ready to say something powerful. And the devil started like messing with his wires in his house.
Yeah. We got you, Chris. We got you.
I'm moving.
You're moving.
Yeah, I'm moving. So we'll go fast. It's something when you were talking, Chuck, is you try to identify words like faith and hope, and you're associating it all with religion. The best thing that I ever heard that is spirituality is about relationships, where religion is all you do in that. Everybody's somewhat religious, right? They brush their teeth every day. They're religious about that. Maybe they're religious about hiking or biking. That religion is what they do frequently. Like religion and habits could go together, right? But faith is the entry point to trust. And trust only comes by knowledge of understanding who someone really is. Like we would say, we trust our spouse. We would say, we trust that our car is going to get us certain where. But trust comes from a deep understanding, and this is that part when we get into a deep relationship with anybody, we'd say we know them, right? But how much time do you spend looking to seek understanding about that person? And when we relate that back to God, you just say, if you understood God and you trust, you'd have faith that all things will work out for his good and for your good. If they're going to work out for God's good, that means they're going to work out for your good. Faith is just that unseen trust, like it's the entry point. And so when we get into this place of sitting with or asking and seeking understanding, we start to get more and more reassurance, and reassurance is the boomerang that comes back and allows your faith to continue to grow. Like it's all about the relationship. And you can have surface level, we talked about this last time, I talk about this every time I talk with somebody. We can either have a surface level relationship where we're going to kind of know each other, or we're going to have a deep relationship. And the thing that's going to look different in the deep relationship is you're going to hear me asking you a lot of questions. Like, I want to know you. Like, I didn't have enough time with Chuck to ask him enough questions, but every time I could, I was just asking him, what'd you do here? And when you were here, what was that like? How did you respond? Where was God showing up in here? Like, where did you say you were most far from God? Like, what was the pathway for you to come back to realize what your purpose really is? And that is faith. Faith is knowing that if I just do God's work, whatever he tells me that is, I don't know day to day. I have to wake up every day unemployed and go, God, what do you want me to learn today? Who do you want me to learn from? And who do you want me to bless? And I leave the rest up to him. I just start moving my feet. And sometimes it's like the Simon Says game, right? It's like if Simon says, move forward 2 steps. Okay, you do it. Okay, Simon says, lift your arm. Lift your left arm. Wait, did he say to do that? No, he didn't. Am I playing the God says game? Did God say to do that? And again, I've heard both of you talk about it's not some loud audible, it's not the Chris, move forward, but it's you'll know when you know. When it's the door open or the door slammed shut. If it's slammed shut, don't try to go creaking in some crack somewhere where you think I gotta get in there. No, it's closed. Don't go there. If you think you're gonna go there, you're gonna go there and you're gonna suffer, and then you're gonna ask God to help you. Help me, God. And he will, he loves you, but it's not gonna come without consequences. So faith is one of those things. It's the entryway to trust. And when you have trust, you can have hope. And where there's hope, there's life. That's the pathway, man. Just align with it. You can either go to the shop and say, you know what? Only align 3 of the tires, keep one of them out of alignment. Because I really like this whole drag thing. I got to build up some strength in this arm. So
I love the trust factor. The one thing I wanted to say about that is, I've worked with some guys in recovery, and and we talked about this last time. It's hey, getting that download, right, is creating that stillness, right? Because I have this little practice where I connect with the Father in my mind. I have this like connection, right? And then I have this like, and I've done this with some people. I have this like character Todd. I said, well, the character Todd, so I could separate my ego, right, from what the real message is. Like the character Todd wants to know this or thinks that this is the right thing to do. But when I create this stillness, right, when I have this moment, that's where I could feel I get this download. But on another note, when I work with some guys, right, I said, God's going to course correct you no matter what you do. Like there's always some kind of thing that's going to be a course correction where you're going to have this message where you could go this way or you could go this way. And so say you go the Todd ego way, right? And I go down this way, like here's a couple more corrections. There's a couple opportunities until when I'm on my way, I'm finally on my knees and I'm like, oh my God. And it's a disaster, right? But God's always there, but there's always something, there's this way to go. So I wanted to share that because when you said that, that came up for me for sure.
I think it's so important that you brought that up. And that's exactly what I was thinking too, was, I'm working with somebody and they say, I want to tell my story, and they go out and they tell me it was a disaster. I went out and tried this and tried that. And what do most humans do? I'm not going back out there. It's hard. The thing is, here's what you have to understand is it's all trial and error. It's all trial and error. And a lot of times what, it's hard to identify is when the God is opening doors and when the devil is opening doors. Because the devil sure makes some things look pretty good sometimes. And like, man, that's going to be, hey, look, Chuck's going to be, in better, more money, a pretty girl, whatever's going on there. And see now, because of my faith and my wisdom, I'm like, this is the devil opening the door. And I identify that and I close that. And so what I coach cancer people to do every day is to test your limits. How do you know your limits if you don't test them? If you don't try things and you go, you know what, that was easy. I could probably walk around the block. I could probably go to the gym. I could probably, go on a vacation that we've been putting off for the last year since my cancer diagnosis. If you don't test your limits, you don't know your limits in your health and also in your faith, in your faith. So as you're testing your limits and you're learning and you're growing, there will be the trials and error. There will be the ebbs and flows. There will be the yin and the yang. There's always going to be that. But if you're not in motion, if you're not moving forward, you will not know your limits. And so, it goes in your health with the cancer people I coach, but it also resonates in our faith, And man, you know what? Like I said, I'm an athlete. I was in sports. I love a challenge. I love a challenge. What do you mean? The doctor, you shouldn't be doing that. What do you mean I can't do a mud run because of stage 4 cancer and a broken spine? What do you mean? This is the kind of testing that went through my brain, was like, yeah, you can. It might take you a little while to train and get to that point, but you will get there. So I love the fact that we're having this conversation, because I was thinking the same exact thing when Chris was talking and Todd jumped in there, and it's all about, you're not gonna fly. You might have to crawl, you might have to walk, you might have to learn to run, and then you may be flying 2 years from now. I don't know. But keep flapping your wings.
It's funny you mentioned that, like, about that flapping your wings, and I always say God doesn't move parked cars, right? You got to get out and drive to do that. But I had a friend who was just diagnosed with some cancer, right? And so I was like all about it, like, hey, let me connect you to this person. Let me connect you to this person. They've been through this, right? And she's like, okay, but was just listening to the doctor. Treatments haven't started yet, and she was in a very different place. Now she's going through some treatments, and treatments are hard, man. And I see it, and we've talked, and she goes, and I see her growth and transformation, not in a bad way, but in a great way, through, like, wow, this is really serious. This is really hard, right? But the concept before, like, okay, I got this. I haven't really started. I'm investigating. I haven't started treatment. Like, I'm using this as a journey, because I'm seeing it real time, because I've had that experience in many areas of my life. But it's through, like, she's getting this struggle, like she's having some, health issues around the treatment, all that. And I'm like, "This is hard, huh?" And she's like, "Yeah." And, and she's, you watch that journey, you walk along. Here's where we're being Jesus-like, right? This is what Jesus wanted us to do, right? Have faith so we could help in the real and tangible, like, as a person, and he's there in our hearts. But that's what, I feel it's in that struggle. Don't run away like we started at the beginning of this. We fear and we don't do anything, but it's in that struggle that all of the knowledge, I feel, is all that growth is found.
You gotta go back to realizing that you don't move the mountain. It's not your strength. It's God's strength. God's going to move the mountain. God's going to lift you. He's going to carry you. And all you have to do is just realize that keep that relationship. Don't edge God out. Like that word ego, what it stands for. Wayne Dyer used to talk about this. He says, I can either be a hostage to ego, or I can be a conduit for God. I can be a platform for God. And when you choose that one, when people call me, they're like, "Hey, I got a guy from that men's breakfast called me, man, a couple times now, just struggling." And he's called me. He's going through what's going to appear to be a divorce. My only response to him is is you got to love her anyway, brother. You got to love her no matter which way that path goes. There's gonna be moments where your ego is going to be so offended that you're going to take it so personally that you're going to speak death and darkness over that woman, who, by the way, it's your fault. You married her. you decided to do that, right? So however that foundation was created, but I kept encouraging him, like, listen, the best path for you is to love her. You're going to do things because I know I do. We're all human beings. We're going to go in places and we're just weak. We're weak. And without God's strength, without that, we're going to be left to our own devices and we're going to try to navigate and figure out. But in those moments of hard, I always say this, the Father knows best, right? That term, I did a little 30-second reel one day and I'm like, the Father knows best. And you always, when you make sense of how God works, he always used this phrase with moms, especially. I don't know, go ask your father. Go ask your father. So now, even at 53 years old, if I'm thinking of something, I'm like, I should just go ask my father. I'm just going to ask my dad, see what he says. And then he's going to tell me something in some way. The leaves are going to, here's the path. The leaves are flickering this way. Maybe he wants me to go this way, right? Just try to your best to obey what the Father wants you to be, where he wants you to go. And it ain't for you to figure out how to get people to do something. It's your job to love on people, love them like he loves us. You do that, you start to come into agreement with what God's got for you.
Wow.
Super simple. We make it hard.
Yeah.
We do. We
One
do.
of the, you know, the thing is with my energy, I was always the guy to run into the fire and ask questions later. I
Yeah.
was always the guy that was like, what? Let me have it. I'm jumping right in there. I was always that guy. And I jumped in a lot of times. And then I realized it was a big mess. And I go, God, look at this. Why you let me do this? And God said, you didn't ask me to run into the fire in the first place. You didn't ask me about the situation before. You didn't pray through it. And so as a divorced guy also, you know, that marriage, you know, that whole situation. And I'm like, God, I can't believe you let me go through this. And he's like, you didn't pray through it in the first place. You know, you didn't, you know, and it's happened not just with marriage, but in a lot of things in life. And this is experience, you know, of three guys who have been through cancer and been through a lot of different things in life. And we are even on different levels as far as our walk and our faith and our, you know, learning and all of this. But there's been a lot of situations where God just said, you didn't pray, you didn't ask me about it in the first place. And man, when you start getting closer to God and when you start, you know, getting into your prayer time, if you and your wife or your girlfriend pray through things, you will have a complete different relationship. It is amazing.
100%, Chuck.
And Ghana and Hannah was my inspiration and my instructions of telling me when we first met, you know, and I asked her out and she said, this looks like it could get serious. And I want you to know something before it goes any further, that you're going to be number two in my life
Yeah,
because
yeah,
Jesus is number one. And I looked at her and I said, where have you been my entire life?
yeah.
And so when we had little, you know, disagreements like everybody has, we didn't argue. We would just say, hey, I'm going to go and just spend some time and pray about this. And we'd come back together and we would start laughing. And we're like, we're going to let the devil come into this beautiful relationship and try to cause problems. It ain't happening. So, you know, to pray through things with your girlfriend, with your wife, it's a complete different program that I didn't know about as a young man, and I wish I did. But God's timing is so important and so incredible. But pray through things together, and you will have the most amazing relationship that you have ever experienced. And I, you know, I got to experience that.
That's beautiful. The one thing that when both you guys were sharing about that and you were talking about Hannah, right, is you know, it's going to be Christmas in a couple days, in a few days here, right? And a lot of people view God and situations as a Santa Claus God, right? Like we're praying. We lost Chris for a minute.
Completely lost him now.
Wow. So we're praying for God in the way we think we want the outcome to be. We're praying for, like, hey, I'm praying, but we have an outcome in our own mind of what it should be like. I'm sure, Chuck, you weren't, you're going through a hard thing. You lost your wife, right? And it doesn't mean that, like, losing her, it was God's will, right? But your will, like, this is the big thing, like the Santa Claus God, and this is, I think, what gets in the way of our faith and our connection with God is we want God to answer our wishes rather than guide and direct us.
Yeah. So, when the last 4 months of Hannah's life, because of not just cancer spread, but also side effect from treatment, her organs were shutting down, her body was shutting down. And I'm rubbing essential oils on her bald head, down her spine, and I'm praying so hard that she would laugh. And I go, "What are you laughing about?" She goes, "Why do you have your eyes shut?" I said, "This is between me and him. I'm praying over my wife, my best friend. I'm praying for complete healing from head to toe. I'm praying 6, 7, 8 times a day over complete healing over her body. And the day after she passed away, I'm walking my dog and I'm just a mess, a mess. And I said, "God, what happened?" I was praying over her 5, 6, 7 times a day, rubbing essential oils on her spine and her head and praying for complete healing from her heads to her toes. And God said, "I gave her complete healing, just not the way you thought it was going to be." When we learn, there's 2 things that I want to teach every single person I meet that I wished I would have learned as a young man. 2 things that would have changed my life is God has a plan in God's timing. If you can learn those 2 things, God has a plan that his plan for your life was already knitted together in your mother's womb. That's going to happen. You have free will, but he knows what you're going to decide. But it's also in God's timing, just like you were talking about. And so when we pray for things and said, "But I want that, now," and then 4 months from now, something happens and I go, "If that would have happened, this wouldn't have happened." So I completely understand why that door was closed. I completely understand now. So giving it to God, having faith that he loves you and he's got the best plan for you is everything in life. Everything.
Amazing. And we could talk forever about faith, right? And one of the things I wanted to, in this conversation, it came out because, we go to struggle, we go to purpose. Like, I remember when I was diagnosed, and this was, I call my little miracle was my infinite mind, or my finite mind, my ego mind. Here we go, edge got out, the character Todd. I always say, here's the character Todd talking, right? This is the way that I know that I could start to connect with the Father.
Character
Is
Todd.
is I asked myself a question which would have never arisen out of my mind, was, what is this trying to teach me? Right? The world stopped for me. And then I realized that I had layers of trauma that I've experienced from when I was a kid. And, we talk about divorce, parents, alcohol, all this stuff. And I was living my life like my foot was on the gas and the brake at the same time. And that brain tumor would have never put it in that perspective. And I would have never seen it that way if it did not happen. And I think, and I share this with people in 2 ways, is that we look at the pain and we're so busy avoiding life with all this stuff we got to get done, that we don't really slow down and, kind of connect with the source to get some of the stuff that we need, that God wants us to hear.
Living in the moment. It's funny that you keep saying that because I have old Chuck and new Chuck. And old Chuck tries to creep in every once in a while and mess things up and listen to the devil. And it's so, I'm not kidding you. I actually call it old Chuck and new Chuck. Oh, that's old Chuck. You don't want that guy around. He's a troublemaker. And he played with the devil for way too long. And every time that I thought I was doing something, that the devil opened the door and thought I was doing something that was going to benefit me more, set me back and set me back and set me back. And then I realized the devil's a complete liar. The devil's a thief. He's a liar. He'll steal your soul. He'll ruin your life. He'll wreck your marriage. And so old Chuck tries to surface, every once in a while. And it's hard, because I live that lifestyle. And now, I'm a complete different guy since I was saved and since I walked close to Jesus. But don't think that there's not a time that, something's going on. And, the cuss words start coming in my mind, but they don't come out of my mouth, or how about popping that guy in the jaw and straightening him out? And that's old Chuck. And I, say, how about praying with the guy and giving him a hug? That's going to get you a lot further than getting yourself in trouble. But yeah, that's funny when you say that about yourself, because I call it old Chuck and new Chuck.
We're human beings. We're human beings that, when we look at ourselves as humans having a temporary, maybe a temporary spiritual experience. When I heard it switch that we're spiritual beings having a temporary human experience, makes it make sense that whenever you're here, forever, how long it is, that this intentionality of being one with where you're at, being grounded, and wherever you're at, just be with that person. When you and I were meeting for coffee, Todd, there was nothing else in the world that was going on. I got up, my kids were at school. For as much as they're safe. When I was with, Chuck, sitting here in my living room or sitting out by the RV with the awning out, having a cup of coffee he made right out of it, and just being in that moment, there's something super powerful and special about not getting hijacked by the past or the future. We only got right now. We only have right now. And when people pass, I believe that that's God's reminder to get up and live. And the one profound statement that Hannah wrote, I'll keep that and cherish it forever till the day I die, is that if I'm going to get up and live, they both said it, but Hannah wrote it, get up and live for Jesus. There was no punctuation. It was just get up and live for Jesus. And if you choose, your choice, right? No one else. Again, be a hostage of ego or a host to God. You choose, your choice. No one's putting a gun at your head. But if you choose to be a host for God, your days, no matter what trials come in your life, will still be fulfilling, and you will find the blessings in all of the things that stress you out. You'll find it. And when you do that, you've actually lived a full life. When you can live with forgiveness, when you can live with empathy, when you can live out of judgment, when you can live without taking anything personally, and when you can just do the best that you can. If you can only get it to the edge of your bed, like Chuck tells some of the cancer patients, look, if you can only walk to the edge of the bed, walk to the edge of the bed. If that's what you got, do that, and watch what God will do from that. God just like, take these little steps, and then I'll show you what else I can do. And you'll realize it's not you, it's me.
Yeah.
Follow me, he says.
I love
There
that.
she is.
Yeah.
Get up and live for Jesus. Yeah.
Get up and live, right? And Chuck and I were talking about this because and I want to hear your experience about this. Is I've been working in hospice a bit, and it's taught me more about life than anything, right? And it made me reflect on my experience, right? Because like I shared earlier, like in your mind and in reality, you're like, hey, I might not be here that long, right? I don't know what this looks like. And Chuck and I were dealing with it. We're talking about it. But knowing that really helped me embrace the things that mattered most in life And I always, like, if I could say something to anybody that is healthy and fine, is understand and sit with that you're going to die. And how would you want your life to really start to look like? And I had that experience, and it was relationships. It was creating these memories. It was creating all this stuff. But it really started to put in the perspective, like, life, because it's something we don't think about. I'd love to hear you guys talk just a little bit about that. I know we're going a while, but man, the energy here is just amazing.
My experience with, you know, I live in Arizona, my family's in Ohio. I grew up in Ohio. All my family's there. I get the call, you know, your cousin passed away, your uncle passed away, your aunt passed away. So I was that guy that never really knew what, you know, the end of life was like. My walk with Hannah through her life and her light that she shined, and she taught me about faith, and she, you know, just loved people right where they were at, no matter how broken. Knew that God put her there at that moment. She even said that. I walked into her room. She's bedridden for 30 days because of a broken bone in her sacrum. And she looked at me and she says, God's got me right where he wants me right now. So there were so many amazing things that I learned from Hannah through her life. And what happened was the fact that hospice was brought in as her body was shutting down. And then they suggested that we take her to a hospice center so she has 24-hour care. And she only lived for another 12 hours once we got over to hospice. And the last thing that happened was I'm next to her, checking on her like I'd been doing for months, because that was the caregiver that I was, making sure she's comfortable, making sure. And so she slept a little bit, and then she tried to sit up, and I got her and laid her back down. I said, baby, you can't sit up. You got too many ouchies and broken bones. And she looks me right in the eyes. And she just smiles so big. And then she pokes out her lips, and I give her a kiss, and I lay her down, and her breathing changed at that moment, and she stayed in that position. She did not move again. And it was almost like, was she in the presence of Jesus when she smiled at me? I almost felt that way. Like, I'm fine now. I'm there. And she stayed in that position till all her family was in around her, and she took her last breath. And I started thinking about that and talking about end of life, and my true experience with my best friend, my wife, somebody I love so dearly, was I want to live like Hannah, and I want to die like Hannah. She smiled at me and gave me a kiss, was the last thing that she did on this earth. And imagine if we're that blessed. There's car accidents, there's strokes when people are just boom, changed. There's things that happen. She was there with me in the moment, and smiled and gave me a kiss, was the last thing she did on this earth. I learned so much from Hannah, because people are always like, the why. I want to live like Hannah, and I want to die the way she died, smiling and giving somebody I love a kiss, and then going off. Now she's in heaven. She don't have a port. She don't have cancer. She don't have broken bones, and she's smiling and happy, and that gives me peace. So the full circle of life has been a huge lesson for me about how to live life, how to live.
It's so beautiful. You know, when you shared that about that moment with Hannah, and that transition, we just think of it as goodbye. You know, that in the physical realm, I'd say, and again, I go back to the physical. I never met Hannah in the physical, but her spirit, her source, just remembering some of the words she would say on your videos, her kindness, her love, like her pure spirit, that's what resides in me. I don't know all those other things, but I know what her message was. Her message and her purpose was clear, and God made it happen that way. you wanted more time with her physically. And I just know why people come in, but how we exit and the piece of it, like I love the book by Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with the Morrie. And you'd understand this, Todd, being with hospice and Chuck being faced with many people you coach that don't move on physically. They pass. Is that no one worries about all the stuff. Death is just is an opportunity for remind those that are still living to actually live.
That's it.
Because they're not, you're not, my dad, when I watched him, like he passed and then we kind of revived him somehow, like should have not called 911, but that he passed when he was in my mom's room. I went and got him. He was in the recliner. And then they're like, you should try to do CPR. They actually brought him back after like 25 minutes of pulse. But, he was, in my mind, he was gone. But in the hospital, when I'm sitting there watching, my dad was like an angry elf. But here's a hardened Vietnam infantry soldier in the 10th offensive of Vietnam, only child, like, really in a hard life with his parents, like just the meanness in it. So that's what his life was. So he was always like angry. And I'd be driving with him was stressful because anybody slow in his way, he'd be yelling at them. I'm like, they can't hear you, right? They can't actually hear you as you're screaming in the car right now. Like in his anger, in that moment, the peace, I'm like, none of it mattered. None of it. And I'm whispering in his ear, I'm like, rest easy, man. Finally rest easy. This is it. So that this idea of we are morbid about death, but this idea, it should be reminding us to live. We all think we got forever. We only have right now. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. I don't want that to be the prophecy.
It was funny. I was in this men's group at church and I was sharing some of these stories. We were just talking around and I started to just share my brain tumor story a little bit. And then I started to share a little bit about hospital and working with some people and some of the lessons that I learned. And the whole shift in energy seemed to have changed for them. And they realized, and it's so cool to watch. And and that's the reason I asked this question, was that the stuff they started the meeting with was not that important that they were talking about. Like it didn't, like in the whole scheme of things, it's like that didn't matter. And they're like, what matters? Like, oh, I gotta call my dad. I got, like I gotta do this. I got like the stuff. It's because the dying process is relatively peaceful. Like it's a process, right? But I've learned and talking to some of these people, it's like how you've lived your life. And the old cliche that you hear in the personal development world, like, yeah, the CEO is like, you're not on your deathbed wishing you worked more, right? Like you were at the office more. And you hear it, right? But until you could fully embody that we have this end, and everything teaches me. I wanted to share this real quick. I was with a guy 2 days ago, 47, younger than me, man. And he's like got the and it's like, and I went in there and he was uncomfortable. He had some stuff. I said, all right, let me help you out. Like I got him squared away. And I'm like, is there anything I could do for you? And this is what I said. And I sat with him and I tell him, I go through and, I put this on my website, toddangelucci.com, my story around it's hard. Like I never say, I'm sorry you're going through. I said, this is hard, man. And he goes, dude, it's really hard. I said, I can't even imagine this kind of hard. I said, but we're going to do a little few hard things. And I said this one thing to him, and I thought about this morning, because this is my mind interpreting what I think is the right thing for people, right? So after I got him settled, I said, is there anything I could do for you? You know what he said to me? He goes, can you get me a winning lottery ticket? And I said, does that really matter? This is what I said to him. I said, would that really matter, right? And you know what he said to me? He goes, I would know that my wife's okay. And it totally because my mind's like, listen, because when I was diagnosed with my brain stuff, like somebody could have wrote me a check for $1 million. At that moment, it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. But the guy, like, look at this. He's a guy wanting to take care of his family. But I didn't think of that. But I sat with it today. Like, talk about my mind thinking what that was all about. Like a lottery ticket. Like, like, why would you? And then it hit me, right? And it just, these little stories hit me. You know what I mean?
I'll tell you about the lottery ticket. Okay. The lottery ticket is knowing Jesus.
Yeah.
The lottery
Yeah.
ticket, and this is what I spent my whole life as a sales guy, and the seminars and the money I spent learning how to make more money. And when I had more money in the bank, I was still confused and unhappy.
Right.
I had I had a bank account. I had a couple of houses. I had trucks. I had landscaping equipment all over town. I had employees, and got to the point where society told me, when you get that kind of money, you're going to be the happiest guy. And I got there and I was just as confused and didn't know why. And really what the confusion was the spiritual confusion. So this is something that I just want to put out there, because we're going to blast this out to all these people. They're going to be watching this and they're going to be sitting there thinking, and the guys keep talking about Jesus and keep talking about all these things. And here's the lottery ticket. And here's why. Our life on this earth is smaller than this. Our life on this earth is smaller than this. Our life in heaven, eternal life, knowing Jesus, getting through the gates of heaven, is so huge. But we spend all of this time just trying to build that bank account, just so, a bigger house, a nicer truck, another vacation for me. These things are very confusing. And when I learned the truth of the matter was if his wife had that winning lottery ticket, or if his wife had a relationship with Jesus, what would be bigger?
Right.
I'm just telling you, from a broken guy, stage 4 cancer survivor, who bumped his head into the wall his entire life, listening to all the wrong things. And man, boy, if somebody would have just collared me when I was a punk and said, listen, I'm taking you to church and you're going to learn about Jesus and why you need to know him and how important that is, that's the lottery ticket right there.
You're so true. And if you think about it, right, I had this conversation because I've done the thing too, like executive coach, I've done all that. I had this, money, and I've had some friends in this money world, right? Because you start to have this money. When you're not worried about money, what are you thinking about? That's when reality starts to set in, because you're with yourself, right? And that's the importance of the spiritual Jesus and all that connection, because everybody, when you don't have it, you're so focused on it and you miss the piece that you could have it right now, because the money's not the answer, right? And I want to say one more thing about that. You talked about The Chosen. They did an amazing job at Jesus's Sermon on the Mount. And when you're worried about money or food or whatever, you could YouTube that clip. It's like a 10-minute clip. It's awesome. And
Really
it
is.
takes that anxiety away. Do you think God would, it was like, and I'm like you, Chuck, I can't memorize these things, I have brain stuff going on, but the whole gist of, like, he's going to allow a bird to die, he said something like that. It was just so amazing. Like, that's the truth,
I got a buddy that's in his late 30s, and he's built a business and he's worth over $50 million. And the last conversation I had with him, he was telling me, oh my gosh, you just the person you are, your energy, this, you could be making millions. And I said, you don't see it. You don't understand.
Yeah.
I was given all of these gifts, this big mouth and my personality through God. And he said, tell everybody about me. And so I live in his economy. And I know that's hard for people that are chasing the rat race and that are juggling and trying to make more money and a side job and things like that. And I loved when I did a speaking event for a real estate group here where there was like 300 people there. And I, told, me and Hannah told our story. And then afterwards, we stay around and take selfies and hug everybody. And a lady's kind of waiting around. And usually that's the cancer people that say, hey, I'm going through cancer right now. But she came up and she said, I was listening to your story and I have been so busy for the last 3 years that I'm missing my kids' sporting events. I miss my daughter's violin recital. I'm missing these things. And I sat here and I listened to your guys' story and testimony today. And today, all of that for me is going to change.
Yeah.
That's everything. Living in the moment. Our faith is wrapped around all of this. And with that, it allows us to just the joy and the peace that I feel is just something that I just want to tell everybody about. And I didn't find it chasing business, putting money in the bank, buying 4 houses, having trucks, having, all these material things. The thing that I was missing was not the things that I was chasing. I'm chasing the wrong thing. And when I found out that what I needed to be chasing was a relationship with Jesus Christ, and boy, when I found it and what happened then, and I said, I'm telling everybody. I'm telling everybody. They've got to know, they've got to at least know. It's their decision then, what they'll do with it. But if I don't tell them about how God sent his son to save our sins and to save us, if I don't tell them that, I'm not doing my job.
Love it. I love it.
So powerful.
So powerful. Guys, we're going to do a round robin. Final words. Chris, what are your
Here's the final word. Listening to you guys, I just sit in awe. I'm like a little kid listening to all this. It's so fun. There's a great YouTube clip from a TED Talk, one of the most followed TED Talks besides Simon Sinek's. And it was Rick Elias, who was on the plane that landed in the Hudson with Sullenberg, Captain Sullenberg. He was sitting in seat 1A. And if you go watch, it's like a 6-minute TED Talk, one of the most powerful TED Talks I've ever seen. And it really changed my perspective on life when I watched that, because when he was going down, like you've talked about, Todd, as he started to count down the seconds and preparing to die, like life was over, he said dying really wasn't that bad. But he was sad because he wished he would have spent more time with his kids, maybe not argue with his wife as much, maybe, spend more time with his friends. And then, as he counts down, he's like, please don't blow up, just finish quick. And then they land the plane. It was miraculous landing. And he said in that little TED Talk that he got a chance to look in the future and then come back and live again. Mm-hmm. And he talks about now he doesn't collect wines. He calls them bad wines because when the bottle's there and friends are there, he opens it. But his only goal, which became my only goal in life, was to be a good father. And what that means to me is that I've been given my children as an opportunity to be a servant, to be a host for them, and to learn from them. And in order for me to be a good father, I have to look to my Father, my Heavenly Father, to figure out ways to do that. And if that's primary in my life, like what Hannah said to Chuck, if he's number one, if he's the prime guy, he's the primer that makes everything else go, my only goal in life is to understand who the Father is and how I can be a host to him and navigate each and every moment I get the chance to be alive, to love on people and to forgive more and to be more present and to just sit in stillness when I am with the Father, to ask him, what is it you want me to know today? And when you listen for his still voice, like life starts to get really good and you walk around with a smile and people are like, are you always this positive? Most times, yeah, some bad stuff happens in my life, but I know this, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay because I know I'm seeing it through God's perspective. And when we see it through his perspective, we see the world a whole lot differently. And I'm always just thankful for the people that I meet each and every day. And even the ones that come into my life where I'm like, man, why are they in my life? I'm struggling here. But I always learn afterwards why they were there. And it was for me to help them see the life that God has for them. That's it. Not my job to force it on them. It's my job to love them and let God deal with the rest.
Yeah.
Man, I love that, Chris. That powerful.
Wow.
Chuck.
Wow. If I can just give some advice to anybody that's watching this, and I would say to digest this, think about what you're hearing. We've been through different walks. We've all faced cancer and death. We started through, pedaling and figuring out life and getting closer to Christ. And there was a lot of things that happened in my life where I was told advice and I said, I'm not doing that. I'm Chuck, I'm doing this. And then 3 days later, I was thinking about it and said, I should probably do that, you know? And so now, what I tell people is one of my favorite Bible verses, is to be, quick to think, slow to speak, and slow to anger.
Mm.
Man, when I started living that, take a step back before you fire off.
Yeah.
Think about just for 3 seconds before you say something and see if you might say something else. So when it comes to something like us hanging out today, 3 guys that are on this journey, and then God puts us all together. Thank you, Lord, for orchestrating that and having iron sharpen iron, and these dudes wrap, around me, that we call each other for advice, and we talk and we laugh and we cry together. I just want people watching this to digest this, not flip it off and then go to work and forget about it, but to maybe watch it a second time, third time, fourth time, because the things that we're learning in life and the things that we're learning through Christ are invaluable. It's life-changing things. And like I said, the real goal is I want people to feel the way I do. And you can go bash your head against the wall for the next 3 years and then go, man, I should have listened. I should have digested that and listened. So digest this, process this, and let it become part of you.
Man, Chuck and Chris, man, I don't even know how to follow that, but I'm gonna say this because Chris reminded me when he talked about the father is I've been connecting a lot more with a lot of men, and I was in this men's group. And for anybody that's watched The Last Kingdom, which is a series on Netflix, right? So the in that series, he says, "I'm Uhtred, son of Uhtred," right? So I'm in this men's group where they say you introduce yourself as Todd, son of Robert, which is my dad, or if your dad's passed, right? And I was like, wow, this is a little interesting. So I started to be, and this is what I'm leaning into, curiosity. I'm like, wow, what's this coming up for me? And I really needed to own, it forced me to own my father, my earthly father, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent. He's a human being, right? And I've grown, and we've grown through some of the challenges and just amazing things I've learned, and really what he was trying to do. But it really often, and I encourage people to think about this. Maybe you don't have that connection with your earthly father, but who is the Father,
Mm.
the Heavenly Father? And I urge anyone to start to form that connection with that Father, and look at all of us as just human beings. And one of the things that has changed my life, instead of me thinking and Chuck talked about it, that that his character Chuck, or old Chuck, right, or I have the character Todd, is I don't have all the answers, and I used to think I had them, and I used to think I knew what the right way was to do things, right? So one of the things I encourage you to do is just be open and curious, and just ask questions to yourself, like, what else could this mean? That's what I did with my brain tumor. Like, what's this mean? What's really going on with this person? What's just this level of curiosity, right? And have the ability, and I think too, being at a certain age, we think we should know things or be better than who we are, right? And the other thing is have an open ability to be learn, that you can learn new things, and that like even if you thought you knew something, is you could just learn, right? And then the final thing, these three words came up as you guys were speaking, is lean in.
Mhm.
And there's three things I mean: lean in to God, lean into your community, your brothers and sisters, and most importantly, lean into your pain,
Mhm.
because it's the biggest teacher. Don't run away from it. Lean into it, stay with it, and ask God for help.
So good.
Love you guys.
Hey, we're gonna end. Thank you so much. Love you.
Thank you, Todd.
It was
Love you guys, man.
a blessing, man.
Good to see your face, Chuck.
Come to the West Coast. Come to
Oh,
Arizona.
I'm coming. I might be out there in January for a conference. I might try to work it out. We're an extra